Epistimones by Blank A. Bellow. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents either are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or locales, is entirely coincidental. Chapter 1. Victor Ross had just escaped the hands of his captives and was now on a journey for revenge, or at least that is what it seemed like to me. What else could bring a young man like him this far north? Victor was average in looks and height, and he was lightly built. He also had dark skin, green hair tied to the back in a little knot, and white eyes. Although humans in this world had come a long way in civilization, they were still against the idea of mixing their tribes and genes, and so a man like Victor was seen as an abomination, a mistake, an anomaly, and it was pretty obvious the moment you took one look at him. Victor had come from the Orc village, down south, and was heading north randomly, in hope of finding some sort of sanctuary where he could rest his head for the rest of his days in peace and tranquility. As he walked through the forest, the trees got bigger and bigger the deeper he went. His heart was beating louder and louder with each step, and he kept on picturing an assortment of beast that could be lying in wait for him behind any of these huge trunks. His heart had almost exploded when he saw a trap that had been triggered. It was a simple ditch covered with leaves and sand. But someone had fallen in, he guessed. He walked over cautiously with one hand in his one-handed strap bag to his right. He looked carefully into the hole and saw a fully cloaked person inside it. Victor was terrified. What was that? A friend? An enemy? Should I help? Is this the actual trap? He thought, looking around his surroundings to make sure that there was no one else around. The person in the ditch had not noticed him yet. He had his head down and looked like he had given up all hope. Victor decided to use this weakness he had displayed to his advantage. He left his right hand in his bag and bent down to give off a stronger vibe. "Hello," Victor said, snapping his left hand at the person in the ditch. It didn't look like he was injured in any way, and the dark hooded jacket was covering him from head to toe. Victor could barely make out who or what he was, but he had every intention of finding out one way or the other. "Hello," he said again, snapping his fingers multiple times to get his attention, but he pretended not to notice him. He also wasn't sure if this stranger was a friend or enemy, and he didn't want help. His pride was too great. "Have it your way then," Victor said, and stood up. He was in a hurry. Something about this forest didn't feel right, and he was not in the mood to help someone who didn't want him to help them. So he turned around to leave, slightly annoyed after being ignored. "Yes?" she finally answered, giving in, as he was the first person to pass by in the last few hours, and there was no other choice. Victor turned back to her excitedly and said, "Oh, so you can speak?" He was hiding it. It shocked him that she was a woman, despite her slightly masculine frame. But the thought of having a companion in this forest was overriding every other thought. He simply didn't want to continue alone. "Why wouldn't I be able to?" she asked back, not liking his condescending tone and sensing a little hesitation in his carefree attitude. "Ha! Ha 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 ha!" Victor laughed. This woman had misunderstood him. Though he wouldn't mind company, it didn't mean he needed it. He could easily keep going on his own, and he would be sure to meet someone else. "I see. You're trying to be smart," he said, getting a feel of her attitude through her voice. "I'd seriously worry for you if you consider this being smart," she replied, fighting back, checking to see if her suspicions were right. "Yeah, I wish you the best," Victor said, turning around to go away again and steeling his heart so he would not get swayed by her feminine charms. He had not seen her face yet, but just her voice was making his heart tremor. But if she was going to treat him like trash before he even saved her, it wasn't worth it. "Wait," she said in a low tone, still clinging to her pride. "Come back," she yelled, trying harder as his shadow disappeared slowly. "Come back," she yelled again, getting desperate. You could feel her fear and pain from her voice, and she kept yelling, hoping to convince him to still offer his aid. All the while, Victor had just walked out of sight and leaned on a tree, listening as her pride was shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. It was a bad habit of his. He enjoyed putting down the strong-headed, and since he had no power to speak off, these tiny moments were all he had to experience that pleasure. Victor took in a deep breath with his eyes closed, savoring the moment, as her cries mixed with the dancing trees and singing birds. "Bliss," he whispered to himself, before opening his eyes and walking back to the ditch to talk to her again. "Hello there," Victor said with a big smile as he towered over the hole in the ground. "Hello," she said back quickly, frightened that he would leave again. There wasn't much time left for her. She needed him to help her now, or they would both be in trouble, but she couldn't rush it, or he would leave again. "That was quick," Victor said, surprised by the speed of her response. "Much better," he added, nodding his head and rubbing his chin in acknowledgement. "Need any help?" he asked with a condescending smile, enjoying the moment some more. "Yes, please," she answered even quicker this time, trying to win his favor back, and soothed his broken ego. "Better," Victor said, nodding his head faster and faster. "But," he exclaimed, stopping abruptly. "What?" she asked, moving back and taking guard. She realized his actions and personality were abnormal, and his help might not be such a good thing after all. "Take off your hood first," Victor said, squinting his eyes and leaning over a little. Something about her wasn't right, and he needed to be sure what. But how? "My hood?" she asked, relaxing a bit. She was scared that he was going to ask for money, because she had none. But on second thought, the hood wasn't such a good thing either. "Yes, your hood," he answered. "I want to see your face first," he said, smiling. He had a plan. The girl in the ditch looked down and placed her left hand on her head. "Can't you help me without seeing my face?" she asked, feeling embarrassed. Her face was hideous, she believed. "Nope," Victor replied quickly, smiling even more. There was no way she could escape now. "Why not?" she asked again, still feeling shy. "I need to see your face, so if you decide to run," Victor said, dragging his hand out of his bag. "I'll use this," he added, holding up a purple slim crystal, admiring it with an evil grin. "That's," the girl said in shock, but stopped herself halfway. Victor said, looking away from the crystal, and at her. "You know what this is?" he asked, but she simply looked away. He had been planning to lie about how it could be used to scare her a bit more, but it seemed like that was no longer going to be possible. But she knew what it was, and was scared anyway, so he decided to go with it. He could already guess who she was, but he needed confirmation. "You're not human, are you?" Victor asked, trying to confirm his suspicion, moving his head around to get a closer look, and possibly a peep under her hood. "I knew your skin tone and voice were different, and I thought it was because I had come this far north. But it seems that's not the case," he added, pushing his luck. He was black, so maybe that would create some sort of response. The girl turned away from him and quickly covered her hands. She felt that was what gave her away. It had worked. "It's no use," Victor said, making a bold move. I already know what you are. Why not take off the hood and save both of us the trouble? The sun is starting to rise, and the owner of this trap will probably start making his rounds soon. He was taunting her. He had never been outside his village or out on his own. He knew nothing. The girl began to shake as she remembered her present predicament. There really wasn't much time left, and if this ditch is what she was sure it was, then... Take it off already, Victor said, squatting down again. Or I'll leave, he added in a serious tone, but he didn't mean it. He needed her more than she needed him. But she didn't know that. Okay, she said, finally giving in. But you have to promise me you won't use that thing, she added, seriously hoping that he wouldn't. On my life, Victor said, raising his right hand. Normally he wouldn't agree, but the sun was rising faster than he expected, and he was starting to get agitated as well. Okay, she said, turning around. Here, she added, pushing it off in one arm swing. Satisfied? She asked, looking up at him properly for the first time since he had arrived. Her eyes were teary, and she was waiting for him to laugh at her. Victor stared at her and immediately felt bad for pushing her this far to reveal such a thing. The moment he saw her face, he understood what he had done. She was an elf with a scar across the right side of her face. To him, she was beautiful nonetheless, but this was something that should not be possible. She had long golden hair and blue eyes with long ears. Her skin was pale, yet it had a glitter that radiated like the stars. She also had a slim frame with an average-sized bosom and oval hips. She was truly a beauty. This sight took him back to a time he was no longer quite sure was real. A dark-skinned woman with green hair was bathing him. When he tried to pull her hair, he was little then, and she might have been his mum or aunt. He wasn't sure anymore, but he could remember her face and words clearly. Stop that, she had said, laughing, loosing his hand from her hair gently and pulling it away. Bab, 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 he replied in childish babbles, beating the surface of the water with his small palms. You know, Victor, to a woman, her beauty is the most important thing, just like honor is to men. The green-haired woman had said, but to an elf, it's even greater than that. They normally look like goddesses, so it's everything to them. They don't even let a scar remain. Oh, how I wish I was an... The memory flashed across Victor's mind, but the feeling of guilt and regret remained in his heart. For him, she was the first elf he had ever seen, and she lived up to their reputation. Plus, she was a relief after looking at orcs for years, so he didn't even notice when the word slipped through his lips. Amazing, Victor said, looking into her eyes that were starting to tear up. Huh? She said, shocked, and quickly cleaned out her eyes. Victor felt the ground and trees shake, and his senses immediately went crazy. This situation was worse than he had thought, but in order to escape, he needed to remain calm and make quick decisions. So he quickly brought out a rope from his bag. Here, he said quickly, lowering the rope. Hurry, he whispered, feeling the ground tremor a little more. She quickly grabbed it, and he pulled her out. When she was out, he grabbed her by the hand and pulled her to the nearest tree. He then pulled out a multicolored crystal from his bag and placed his finger on his lips, telling her to remain quiet as the ground shook even more fiercely. This was all he could think of for now. They wouldn't make it in time if they decided to run. Victor pushed himself on her and onto a tree, then squeezed the crystal in his hand and passed on his will to it, activating it. He and her slowly blended in with the trunk. It was an invincibility crystal. As they vanished, he brought out another crystal and quickly rubbed it on his body and her body before activating it. and leaving it to fall on the ground. The crystal was light green and covered in moss, and it broke as he dropped it and vanished into thin air. It was to mask their scent and blend it in with the forest. The ground shook even more now as it got closer and closer. It stopped at the hole and inspected it. "Grr, where is it?" the giant said, looking around as it sniffed the air, trying to get an idea on where his prey had escaped to. "Nothing," he said, looking down at the trap, "and I was sure I smelt something this way." What a waste," the giant said, getting back up. He broke some branches from the surrounding trees and placed them on the ditch again. "That should do," he added, as he got up and admired his work. "On to the next one," he said, and walked away, shaking the earth with each step he took. He wore a lion cloth, and his hair and beard were scruffy. Plus, he was well built, and his face was terrifying, much like most giants. As he went far out and the earth regained its balance, the elf and Victor still refused to move an inch. There was still a possibility that he was around, and if they made any funny movements in a few quick steps, he would catch them, and that would be the end of it. So they waited, and waited, and waited, until the sun was clearly up in the sky, and its beams shone lightly through the leaves to the ground, lighting up the forest a little bit. Victor looked at the elf and nodded. She nodded back. He then moved closer to her ear and asked if she was ready to go. The crystal was approaching its limit, he whispered to her, and she nodded again in agreement. His voice was tickling her ear, but she couldn't think of that now. He nodded his head once, counting, then twice, and then on the third nod, they both turned and started to run west as quickly as they could. As they ran, the effects of the crystal wore off, and the invisibility as well in the process. They hadn't even gotten far from their starting point when they heard some birds take off behind them, and the ground started to shake again as the giant came running in their direction. None of them turned around. The fear would probably paralyze them. Victor had suspected that the giant had laid in wait for them, and he was right after all. They were the best hunters in the world. He pulled out the purple crystal in a haste, trying his hardest to focus so it wouldn't fall in the process, and handed it to the elf as the giant got closer and closer. "Use it to take us to a safe place. Quickly!" Victor yelled at her as the giant got closer. The elf took it and quickly placed it on her forehead to get a better image of where they were going, and started to activate it. The giant was close enough to see them now, and increased his speed, stretching out his hand to capture them. The elf reached out her hand to Victor, and he took in just in time before the crystal took effect. As the giant's palm closed in on them, a purple light enveloped them and took them away. "Damn it!" the giant yelled as his hand grasped nothing but air. "They got away," he said, jogging slowly as he reduced his speed. "Now what am I going to eat today?" he asked himself, placing his 2 hands on his hips, and came to a stop. He was hungry, and some of the best snacks had just escaped him. How humiliating. Victor and the elf landed in a river far away. He was shocked because he hadn't expected water, but the elf helped him swim back up, and then they both quickly swam to shore. The river was surrounded by similarly large trees as the giant's forest, but there were more flowers, and the forest looked richer and far more peaceful. Victor got up and walked a little, looking around. Then he touched his body all over to be sure he was alive. "Ha ha ha ha, yeah." Victor laughed to the sky. "Hell yeah," he said in a higher voice, thrusting up his fist. "Take that bench," he yelled as he did a little victory dance, swinging his hands and hips from side to side. The elf got out of the pond and squeezed the edge of her cloak as she watched his victorious display, finally calming down after the dancing session. The fear was fading from his heart and the adrenaline from his body. "You done?" the elf asked, smiling at his unexpected playful side. She had another agenda, and she had already allowed him to have his moment. Yeah, Victor replied, breathing a sigh of relief and relaxing a bit. He actually survived. He thought to himself. Good, the elf said, holding up his bag. You've got some explaining to do, she added, with a serious expression on her face. Victor was shocked. He touched his right side and upper left shoulder with his 2 hands to make sure it was his. Then he remembered her touching him weirdly in the water after they landed. He had thought she was just helping him to regain his balance and swim back up, and wasn't paying attention. Oh, Victor laughed, walking around a little bit, feeling stupid. You sly fox. This how you repay a debt, he added, complaining, since it was the only thing he could do at this point. That and this have nothing to do with each other, the elf said back, sternly, following him with her eyes. She wasn't playing around. You know who I am and what I am, but I don't know anything about you. And no matter how I look at this, she said, glancing at the bag in her hand, there's no way a human can know how to use what you have inside this. And she shook the bag to add effect, and could hear all sort of crystals clashing inside. Wait, she said, looking inside the bag. There are a lot of rare ones inside this. How did you get your human hands on this? She added, looking at him with pressed eyebrows. Victor felt insulted, but at the same time it felt like bait. Sly words. If it was any other person, you would have them fooled with your kind act, Victor said, pointing at her, getting cautious. But not me. I won't fall for it, he added. What are you talking about? She asked, feeling that he was forcing an impression on her from just this instance. He was the bully, not her. If anything, she was the one who was supposed to look at him like that. Oh, playing dumb now, are we? Victor said, getting even more cautious. He could feel his heartbeat getting faster again. I know you just want to know everything about me, so you can savor my meat as you dine on my flesh, he added, holding up his 2 hands and staring at the sky, running to insanity to protect his fragile mind. Dine? She asked, surprised at his words. What was he talking about? She thought as she saw the fear grow on his face. He couldn't really believe those rumors. Yes, dine, you human eaters. Oh my, Victor said, looking down in agony. I should have just stayed with the orcs. They hated human meat, he added, as his voice began to shake. She looked like she was sizing him up and dividing him into rations already, with the way she was examining him, and he couldn't help but feel hopeless. Without that bag, he might as well be an antelope being stared down by a tiger. So the orcs gave you this, she said, holding up his bag, finally getting some clue as to who he was and where he came from. Orcs? Who told you that? Victor said, shocked. His thoughts were all over the place, and he couldn't keep up with anything that was happening around him. He couldn't even clearly hear the words that were coming out of his own mouth. You just did, she said with a confused look. Feeling more pity than caution at this point, he looked terrified. Where did all that confidence go? She thought. Me? Oh no, it must be mind-reading magic, isn't it? Victor added slowly, backing up. He knew the elves had magic, but his knowledge on what type and their application was limited. No, I won't let you have me, he said, still moving back slowly. There's no, he was saying, when he tripped on a root and fell. He hit his head and passed out before he knew it. The elf stared in confusion for a while. Then, when she understood what had just happened, she busted into laughter. He is a riot, she said in between breaths. When she had finished laughing, she pulled out the rope from his bag and tied him up before he woke up so he wouldn't run. She also noticed that her hair was still slightly dirty from their fall, and went back to the river to wash it off. As she washed the dirt away, she looked at her reflection on the water and touched the scar on her right eye gently. It bothered her endlessly and for so long. And he went and said that so casually. "Amazing, huh?" she said, smacking the surface of the water with her hand. "Making fun of me like that," she added, stuttering a little bit. She felt he was lying when he said it, but at the same time, she also felt he was telling the truth and couldn't shake of this warm feeling of relief. After she was done washing her hair, she gathered some wood and started a fire to dry off her clothes. She also decided to drag him close to the fire, still tied up, of course, so he could dry off as well. Hunger came soon after she sat down, with her stomach growling, and she looked around frantically, trying to see if there was anything she could eat. Perhaps a mushroom or something? She hit his bag with her leg slightly, while looking around, and couldn't help but wonder if he had brought some sort of food along with him. He was traveling, so he had to have something. She looked inside his bag after a quick inner battle between herself and hunger, which she lost and found some meat he had wrapped up in some leaves. She was unbelievably hungry, since she had not eaten for 2 days now, so she helped herself to some at first, as she waited patiently for him to wake up. But her hunger was far deeper than she had imagined, and she ate it all before she knew it. "Ha, Kesef," Victor muttered, turning around in his sleep. "Leave her," he added. "Leave her." He said again, "Leave her alone," he yelled as he got up. The elf jumped back, startled by his actions and the amount of rage in his voice. Victor noticed her and the fire. His instincts took over immediately, and he tried to run. He wasn't fully awake, and he couldn't help but panic. When he tried to move but couldn't because of the rope, he started to look around quickly, trying to grasp the situation and find a way to escape as quickly as possible. But there was none. He calmed down a little, and his memories started to add up. "Untie me," he yelled at her, recalling the recent events and trying his last resort. The elf simply stared at him. It was hard to understand the kind of person he was. Sometimes he looked brave, and other times he looked terrified. She felt pity for him. He must have had a hard life. "Untie me," Victor yelled again, getting even more desperate. "I will," the elf answered, "but you have to answer my questions first," she said, sitting up and composing herself once more. She was going to get some answers whether he liked it or not. Victor noticed the conviction in her eyes and sighed, lowering his head. He wasn't that much of a hard worker in the first place. "Okay, make it quick," he said. He really wanted to be free. Being tied up made him feel too vulnerable. "Good," the elf said back, seeing him calm down. "Who are you and where did you come from?" she asked, getting right to it, prepared for a thorough interrogation. "I'm human and I come from a village in the south," Victor replied, quickly trying to be a model prisoner and get freed so he could be on his way. There was no way he could stay here any longer if she already had this much suspicion pointed at him. "Okay," the elf said, suspiciously doubting his answers. They were coming too quickly from a person who didn't want to answer at first. Maybe he was far weaker than she thought. "Where did you get this?" she asked as she picked and held up his bag. "That was given to me by a friend of mine." Victor answered even quicker, so she wouldn't think he was thinking it through and taking his time to lie. "A friend? What race?" she asked, remembering his comment about the orcs. "He was an elf," he replied, calming down to get his answers in order, so as not to annoy her any further than he already had. "An elf gave you crystals?" she asked in disbelief, because she was very sure that they didn't do that. "Yes," Victor answered, pushing his lie. He couldn't take back words at this point. He didn't even know where he was. There was no guarantee of his safety. "I don't believe you," she said, shaking her head. "We don't share our magic with anyone outside Midorin. You would misuse it," she added sternly. She was being nice. Their creator had said that mankind was too ugly and unrefined to wield their magic, but there were exceptions. "Heh heh heh." Victor giggled at her words. "What's funny?" she asked, irritated by his response. "Nothing really. You said misuse, yet my misuse saved your life. You would have been in that giant soup pot by now," Victor said proudly, reminding her that she was in his debt. It was his last card, and he intended to use it to its fullest. The longer this conversation lasted, the more she was going to forget that fact, so it's better now than never. "That and this are two different things," she said harshly, shooting him down. "If the elves were to see you with this, you would have been considered a bandit and killed on the spot. You should be grateful that I'm such a lenient person," she said, raising her head in pride, reaffirming her control on the situation and repaying her debt in words. "Thank you, oh, great benefactor," Victor said, mocking her generosity. "If you stop with these ridiculous questions and let me go, I would consider your debt paid," he said, taking his price by force. "Even though it's unfair," he whispered to himself, looking away from her, trying to draw sympathy. "That won't happen," the elf said, getting up. She raised her right palm and pointed it at him, and took a stance. "The next time you dodge or mock my question, I'll end this," she threatened, trying to draw out the coward in him. The look in Victor's eyes changed. His eyes' lids relaxed and his brows dropped. "Go ahead," he said. "I've told you everything I could, and I was tired anyway," he added. The look in his eyes were that of a man who had grown tired of life and saw a way out. He welcomed death so easily and quickly that it scared her a little bit. His change in character shocked the elf, and she was left speechless. She remembered how weak humans were. Since he had saved her, she had looked upon him as an equal, but to him that wasn't the case. This was literally the equivalent of her being caught by a giant. "Just answer this," she said, dropping her hand. "Are you my enemy?" she asked. "If I were, you'd be dead," Victor said lifelessly. "Okay then," she said, walking up to him. "That's all," she added, loosened the rope, and let him go. "Thank you," he said, getting up and dusting himself off. "No problem," she said, handing him his bag. "You got something there," she said, reaching out her hand to take out a leaf from his hair. "Leave it," Victor said, pushing her hand aside and pulling it off himself. "Okay," she said, moving back, feeling bad. Victor placed his one-handed strap bag across his chest once more and was about to leave. "Where are you going now?" the elf asked. Still feeling bad. He was dancing just a few hours ago, and it was nice. But now he felt so distant that she couldn't help but feel a slight ache in her heart. "That doesn't concern you anymore, does it?" Victor said coldly, and turned to walk away. "This forest is dangerous," she added. "How are you going to survive? Those crystals aren't going to last you much longer. Or can you fight without them?" she asked, playing with her two hands behind her back, trying to convince him to stay a bit longer. "I'll figure something out," he replied, and tapped his bag twice. "I ate it," she said, looking down, embarrassed. "Ate what?" Victor said angrily, still walking away. "Wait a minute," he said slowly, and came to a stop. He touched his bag and felt nothing. He then looked inside quickly and tried to find his rations. "What did you do?" he said with anger, turning to look at her. "That was supposed to last me a whole week," he yelled. "Sorry," she said, still looking down, feeling apologetic. but she was glad he was still around. "Sorry, sorry," he yelled. "Is Sorry going to feed me?" he added, enraged. The elf raised her hand weakly and pointed east into the forest. "What's that? I should go." "Okay, I'm going," he said as he walked away, all the while muttering to himself. "My house," she said weakly. "Huh?" Victor said angrily as he turned back. "My house is close. You can come and eat before you go," she added, being a little skeptical, but this was her only choice. Victor stuttered. He was starving. "I'll take you on that offer," he said, walking back angrily, and the elf smiled, realizing that he wasn't really angry with her. He was just the sort of person who was honest with his feelings. "What's funny?" he asked her in irritation. "Nothing," the elf said, leading the way. Smiling. After walking for 30 minutes through the woods, they came up to a small cabin. It had a crystal on the banner, hanging from the door. The area around it was clear and it was covered with grass. It felt like a comfortable home, where one would want to be in their old age. Maybe she was married, he thought. "This it?" Victor asked, stopping for a second to look around cautiously, because he still didn't trust her completely. "Yes, come on in," the elf said, going straight for the door and unlocking it. Victor said to himself, noticing the banner. He followed her into the small cabin. There was a counter on the left and some chairs and tables scattered on the right, covering most of the room. It felt like a warm and cozy bar, similar to the one the orcs had, but yet again, they had simply rebuilt what the elves had left behind. "Grab a seat," the elf said. "Sure," Victor said, walking in as well. There was no one here, so he was starting to relax a little bit now, especially after spending all day with her. "I'll fix something up. I shouldn't be long," the elf said, going behind the counter. As Victor sat down, he looked around, still a little bit cautiously. "This your place?" he asked. "Yes and no." The elf giggled, scrambling things together, trying to make a meal. The fact that someone thought she owned this kind of place made her laugh. "Great. There are still some vegetables here," she whispered to herself, looking into a cupboard under the counter. "What do you mean by that?" Victor asked, still looking around. "Well, it's my friend's place. I took over after she died," the elf said. Putting on the stove, it was a red circle crystal. She tapped it with her hand, and it began to glow and heat up. She then placed a pot on it and put in some water. "My condolences," Victor said, feeling bad for prying. "Condolences? What's that?" she asked, cutting some carrots into the pot. "It's like a sorry," Victor said, starting to feel a little comfortable. "Why would you tell me sorry? She's the one that died," the elf said back. "Well, you miss her, don't you?" Victor asked. "I do," the elf said, looking away from her cooking for a while. "But that doesn't mean you have to apologize to me," she added, getting back to her cooking. Maybe sorry wasn't the right word. "It's like saying, you must be strong, or something like that," he said, moving his hand around a bit, physically, trying to catch the words. "I don't get it," the elf said back. "Just forget it," Victor said, frustrated. He was hungry, and wasn't in the mood for a long conversation, especially one that required that much mental effort. "You humans are weird," she said, giggling a little. "I guess it would look like that to you," Victor said, leaning his chair back. "A few more minutes," she said, noticing his impatience. She had eaten, and was okay, but he hadn't, and wasn't hiding it. When she was done, she came around the counter and handed him a plate filled to the brim with all sorts of veggies. "Thank you," he said, taking it quickly. It smelt good. "It's me who should be thanking you," she said, taking a seat at the same table with him. "And sorry about the whole interrogation thing. I had to," she added, finally apologizing. It had been bugging her the whole way here. She felt like she had forced him into a corner and made him remember something unpleasant. "Sure, don't worry about it," Victor said in between big bites. He was just happy he was finally eating something, since he had also not eaten since yesterday night. "Where are you going from here?" the elf asked aggressively. She was not one to circle around first. She just went straight to the point. She wanted to know more about him. "Anywhere the land takes me," Victor answered, enjoying his meal. He wasn't even bothered anymore. He was simply glad that he got to eat one more time after what happened today. "So you weren't going anywhere in particular?" the elf asked again, prying into his life gently. "Nope," Victor replied, relaxing and slowing down a bit, since most of the food had gotten to the bottom of his belly. "I used to live with some orcs, but they kicked me out. Said I was no longer of use to them," Victor added. "Orcs, huh?" the elf said doubtfully. "What about them?" Victor asked. "Nothing really. Just that there's no way they could have made those crystals," the elf said, prying again. "Fine," Victor said, dropping his spoon as he had finished his meal. "The orcs I used to live with attacked elves every now and then, and I was given the spoils to break down and teach them how to use. Crystals were a constant thing. After I had taught them all they could possibly want to know, they tried to kill me, and I ran away. Into the wild, wild world, without any protection from any of the races, but with the crystals, I can survive," Victor said with conviction in his eyes. "I see," the elf said, looking down. "Then do you want to work here?" She asked, changing the topic, because she felt he was starting to hate her, and she didn't like it. "Work here?" he asked, shocked. "Yes, I was planning to reopen shop soon. One of the reasons I went out was to look for raw materials for cheap, instead of buying them from town. But it seems that's what I'm going to have to do. And as you can tell by the size of this place, I don't think I can run it on my own." Victor said, analyzing her. He still couldn't trust her, but that banner had piqued his interest. "Well, you already have more than basic knowledge of what crystals are and how they can be used. It'll be a cinch to teach you than any new recruit at this point. What do you say?" He wasn't listening again. He still couldn't trust her. "What is this?" he thought to himself, rubbing his chin. Something about her wasn't right. Why was she being nice? "What is it?" she asked. "Why are you trusting me? I just told you that I used stolen goods from a village of your kind," he asked, getting it off his chest. There was no more point in playing smart. "That's exactly why I'm offering you this job. I'd rather you stay here than go around spreading more of our secrets," she replied anxiously, stuttering on a few words. It was a lie to cover up her curiosity. "That's true," Victor said, getting where she was coming from. It was sort of understandable. And after that trauma today, he wasn't sure he wanted to go out on his own again. "What's this job?" he asked. "It's a simple smith's job," she answered, happy that he was showing interest. "Smiths?" he asked. "Yeah, those crystals," she said, pointing at his bag. "We make them here." "Oh," Victor exclaimed as his eyes lit up. "So you're one of the craftsmen that make this beautiful objects," he added, taking her hand. "I have admired your art for years. When I saw the sign, I suspected, but to think I'd actually meet one in my life. Oh, how lucky am I," Victor said with tears in his eyes. He was truly happy. When he told the orcs that he would one day meet one of the elves that make these crystals, they would always tell him to give up, and he eventually did without knowing it. But here he was. with an elf. You're a weird one, she said, pulling her hand away from him, feeling her heartstrings tug a bit. But I'll still hire you, she said with a smile. I don't mind. I set out on this journey to find you people. I've studied your crystals since I was a little boy. They've always been my friends, he said, rubbing his bag. He pushed too far. Guess humans are still filthy to the elves. He should probably throw away that thought. Friends? She asked. Yup, they were my only company in that town of mannerless idiots, Victor said with hatred. But all that is over now, he added, releasing a sigh. Want seconds? She asked, looking at the plate, trying to offer him some compassion, since he was pathetic enough to think that crystals could be his friends. I wouldn't mind, Victor replied, feeling at home. Give me a second, she said, getting up. By the way, my name is Victor, he said. As she went behind the counter, Victor Ross, he added. Oh, names, I completely forgot, she said, filling up the plate happily. Mine is Marcia Sales. Nice to meet you, she said, dropping the plate back in front of him. Marcia, what a lovely name, he said, digging in. It is? She asked, getting that warm feeling again. It is. It just rolls of the tongue, he said with a big smile. I see, she said, looking away, embarrassed. Thanks for the food again, he added. Enough of that. Just eat, she said, swinging her hand at him.